I'm a great fan of Proverbs, and there's an amazing proverb from Japan that says, when the winds of change are blowing, some build a wall and others build a windmill. And the more I've lived my life and 24 years of business, I've realized that the difference between success and failure tends to be the difference between whether you're building a wall when the winds of change are blowing or whether you're building a windmill, metaphorically. If you think about your career, how much have you been focusing on building a wall or a shelter against things that have changed? So those people who put their hand up about being comfortable with change, put your hands up again, the people who really love change. These are windmill makers. These are people who actually like change because you can actually feed and fuel a windmill that creates things. That's the DNA reason of liking change. But there's something else as well that I've realized through the years. And I've realized that most people in business and in society are sleepwalking towards a future that they wouldn't necessarily want to live in. Anyone in here have got teenage children? Put your hands up. I think you may understand what change feels like when you're seeing the life that our teenagers are living, who may or may not be conscious yet of the future that they will be the leaders in. So everything that Raf has spoken about is going to be led by our children. And so the consciousness of all of the things that Open-Xchange stands for is primarily important, not necessarily just for the people in this room, but for the people that we're bringing into the world. The 13-year-olds, the 11-year-olds, the 9-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, who will be our bosses. We may be the chairman of their boards, but they will be the chief execs. These are the people that we actually need to enable not to sleepwalk through society, not to sleepwalk into the future, and not to build walls against change, but to be conscious of the change and to build the windmills to be fueled from them. It is our duty as humans to do that. It's mandatory. But it requires one thing. And if I were to write, I've got a few business books, but I'm not here to promote them at all, but they are available on Amazon and Kindle. But the key point is that if I were to write the ultimate business book, it would be one word long. The difference between success and failure is purely down to your level of willingness. The actual will, the will to teach our children to be conscious and not sleepwalk through their lives, the willingness to actually embrace the change and build the windmill, is all based on the will. It is the willingness of Elon Musk. It was the willingness of Steve Jobs. It was the willingness of anyone who builds. It's the willingness of our chief exec here. Now, I don't work for Open-Xchange. I work for myself. I travel the world and I enable people to understand what's happening and what to do about it. That's what I do. I'm in the business of thought expansion. And this would be my entire business book offering. It is the will. Because with the will to succeed, succeed you will. And without the willingness, we can't do anything. Now, we were speaking about change and the openness, the requirement for openness and encryption. But I think that a lot of people would ask why any of this really matters. And we had a perspective on one side of the fence, and I wanted to talk about, for those people who really like change, exactly why our embracing of change matters and why willingness matters on top of it. Because today is the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience. The change of the last 50 years is pretty similar to the change we'll experience in the next 5. I want you to digest that. The change of the last 50 years is pretty similar to the change we'll experience in the next 5. Today is the slowest pace of change you will ever experience. Now, I remember the good old days in business when we used to get involved in one-off change management. Do you remember that? Come in one day, the office has got a new lick of paint, everyone's got new business cards, we've knocked down some walls in the office so we can all have open working space, and we're done. One-off change management. Today, we're managing perpetual change. Now, for those who don't like change, this is a nightmare. And the reality is, humans don't like change. It's innate. In fact, change is the enemy of the competent because it challenges the comfort zone in which the competent dwell. And we can choose, when we see the things that we've seen on the screen around the ecosystem and the maturity of that, we can choose to react or respond. We tend to just automatically react. Reaction is reenaction of a memory. It's a memory muscle. But a response is a total choice we can make, and we can choose that response as much as we like. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, said, "The gap between stimulus and response lies our growth and our freedom." The gap between stimulus and response lies our growth and our freedom. You can choose your response. You do not need to react to change in the way that we have done in the past. But what happens in business is we tend to have business poisons running through our bloodstreams. See if you recognize a couple of these. We know enough. The reality is that 1% of stuff we know. There's 1% of stuff we don't know, and 98% of stuff we don't know. Another business poison is that we're fast enough. It's okay, John, because the speed of change is just as fast as we're innovating. Which, by the way, is the sister to we're good enough. Another business poison is we're rich enough. We've got 60 billion euros in the bank. There's nothing that can go wrong. I remember that when I was the chairman of the British music industry. I was the youngest ever chairman at 27 years old. I'm a lot older now. I'm 27 years old, chairman of the British music industry with a committee full of 65-year-old men. We were the third largest GDP contributor to the UK. We were expensing Porsches in the music industry in 1999. Our entire life was printing money. And today, it's 93% less profitable. Business poison. We're innovative enough, or we have plenty of time. Or, this is a killer, we've tried it before, which is the ugly brother to we haven't tried it before. See if any of these you recognize. Just, don't need to put your hand up, but if you recognize any of these business poisons. I love this one. Our competitors have done it, which is the cousin to our competitors haven't done it. Oh, then I hear this one. I mean, I speak in different companies, from big pharma to healthcare, whatever, and they say, yeah, but our company's different, or our industry is different. But the worst business poison on earth that seeps through the veins of businesses, even in this room, is this isn't relevant to me. Not my circus, not my monkeys, as the Polish expression says. This business poison is absolute commercial suicide and is so common, I would suggest that it is the reason why we miss the obvious, inevitable outcomes that are right in front of us, manifesting day to day. The requirement for openness, the requirement for people to be able to control their own data, the requirement for encryption isn't something that's optional for the future of humankind. But yet some people think it's not relevant. So what's the antidote to all of this? What's the antidote? What's the opposite of all of this? How can we embrace the changes? How can we see what's out there? How can we gain the willingness? Well, there are 5 key factors that I would suggest we implement. And those 5 are in not any particular order, but they start with vision and purpose. And then there's awareness and understanding. Then there's bravery and confidence. Then there's speed and momentum. And what begins and ends all businesses and all lives is people and culture. This is what I would suggest is the antidote to business poison, which enables the willingness for us to build windmills. Let's get into it. I've always wondered that if Nokia were actually in the business of connecting people, they'd have created Facebook. If you're really in the business of what Kodak thought they were in the business of, they would have created Instagram. Why didn't the music industry, why didn't we create iTunes or Spotify? Why didn't Avis or Hertz create Citycar or Zipcar? Why is it that all of the innovations that destroy markets don't come from the people in the markets with the skill sets to do so? Is that bizarre? Whereas if you find companies that really understand the business that they're in, Wonderbra doesn't make lingerie, Wonderbra makes confidence. And if you look at the other companies that absolutely know the business they're in, we're talking about vision and purpose here. If you understand the clarity, what clarity looks like, whether it's enabling a better and more advanced civilization, or in Under Armour's case, empowering athletes everywhere, you then look at the other companies that are nailing it, and what they've done is they've elevated their view of the business that they're in. Tesla Motors, it's really simple. Our goal when we created Tesla a decade ago was the same as it is today, to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport by bringing compelling mass market electric cars to market as soon as possible. That's it. The rest of it is just explaining why the first one was so expensive. That's it. I helped with this bit. I was like, Elon, you can't just say this, dude. You have to do this too. Elevating. The companies that I've helped, and I played a modest hand with launching eBay, the strategy for Amazon's launch. I did 6.5 years with Steve Jobs. I do a lot of stuff with Elon at the moment. The reality is, these are elevated people. They are not thinking that they're just creating cars. They're doing things that are a lot bigger. The question is, what business do we think we're in? When we look at Kodak, I remember going to Kodak in 2001 with a Samsung V2 phone that could take 4 pictures, 0.2 megapixel camera. I was laughed out of the boardroom of Kodak. Here. And that's not saying I'm smart. I'm saying that they didn't understand the business that they were in. So I went to Fujifilm, and Fujifilm instantaneously saw the writing on the wall, figuratively speaking. They saw the photos on the wall. The chief exec of Fuji said, how many of these phones do you think are going to sell over the next 10 years? I said, I don't know, 700 million to 1.3 billion? I mean, I was out by maybe $750 million, too low. And so what Fuji did was they realized that we're not in the business of cameras. What business are we really in? And they realized that they're in the business of how light damages material, because that's what photography is. It's writing with light. It damages film. So then they asked the question, how else can we manipulate the effect that light has on material? And they launched what became, and still is, the world's largest and fastest selling anti-wrinkle skincare cream brand called Astalift. How else can we affect the way that light damages, or manipulate the way that light damages material? And this material is what they started with. Fujifilm now can get into tires for cars and get into roofs of houses. Why not? Deck chairs, umbrellas. Where do you think Fuji's innovation is going to stop? It can't whilst there is a sun and there is material. That is the size of innovation. What business are you in? I think we know the business that Raf is in. What business are you in? Most companies are on the bottom left-hand side. Most companies think that they're in a particular myopic business. We're a technology infrastructure company providing CRM services and cloud management. On the top right-hand side, no one said that last night, but the right-hand side is the business we're actually in. And there is an enormous competitive advantage between the two. Because the reality is, you're dealing with very few competitors at the top right, and you're dealing with millions on the bottom left. I believe that our ability to elevate is directly proportional to our ability to innovate and grow. All of this is absolutely blatantly obvious if we look at the successes and failures. Our ability to innovate is directly proportional to our ability to elevate. What business are we really in? Now I'm going to talk about awareness and understanding. And I want you to, whilst I'm going through this, I want you to think about any business poisons that might be bubbling up inside you. Especially, we've tried it before, we haven't tried it before, we know enough, it's not, or whatever. But the it's not relevant to me is the real problem here, if you find it. Because I've never done the same keynote twice. This keynote is built for you. From the attendee list, and from speaking to Chris and to Raf for hours about this, this is for you. If I show you something and you don't think it's relevant, that's not the problem of what's on the slide. I think the saying in consultants' words is picnic. Problem in chair, not in computer. Anyway, as we look around the scenarios of the future, we don't necessarily know which ones are going to take off quicker, slower, whatever. But there are certain things that we can sense. For instance, the evolution of persona is such that the people that are using our services and the staff that we employ aren't necessarily just one person alone anymore. Due to connected technology, we know that everyone who's digitally connected is connected to an average of 120 people each, which means the second tier reach of everyone is 14,400, 120 by 120. The third tier reach is 14,400 by 120, which is 1.728 million of every single individual human being. And what's more so is the population of the world is actually about 21 billion, not 7 billion, because everyone has about 2 or 3 personas. So, for instance, the reality is that my daughter on Facebook is a 17-year-old boy, gangster. On Twitter, she's a 35-year-old surgeon, female surgeon. On Snapchat, she's a cat. And rather worryingly, on Instagram, she's a carrot. How can we build services for my daughter? This is the evolution of the persona. I'm still not quite sure whether or not that carrot is rude or not. Anyway, the evolution of retail is such that we're dealing in an environment where the largest retailers are humans, not businesses. Etsy, with 184 million users, is the same size as eBay that sells tens and tens and tens of thousands of branded products that aren't authorized by the brands every day. And I get phone calls from these guys and any other brand around the world saying, help us sue the people on Etsy. I say, fine, it's going to take around 3,500 years and 14 trillion euros of legal money. How are we feeling about that? It's like standing in the Pacific Ocean with your hand out trying to stop the waves. The evolution of transaction, I find it alarmingly funny. As in laugh out, like real LOL funny, or maybe ROFL, or whatever, I don't know. I'm trying to be young and down with the kids. The reality is that as soon as the banks and the stock exchanges start trialing blockchain, the pure irony of the world we're living in is apparent. It doesn't require banks. It doesn't require stock exchanges or lawyers or accountants. Beautiful. You always can smell disruption in the air where the people who are blatantly going to go out of business start trying the new funky technology. We can build something with blockchain. You can, and then you'll find actually it's an open public ledger where everything's transparent and you don't need to be in the middle of anymore. But that's good. So the evolution of ownership, the evolution of ownership is such that now ownership is a thing of the past. My daughter thinks my LP records, everyone remember polyvinyl acetate records? She says, that's where Daddy stores his downloads. We're in a situation where you don't need to own anything anymore. City Car and Zipcar are eating the car sale market, and Uber, eating it up. Spotify is totally obliterated a large part of the music industry. The evolution of ownership. Think about what this means to you in what you build. I love speaking to ISPs. Any ISPs in the room? That's a shame. Oh, hi. I love speaking to ISPs about this side. I always say, what is your role as British Telecom or any other ISP around the world? What's your role when Google put the balloons across the whole of the developing territory, the billion balloons that enable connectivity, or when Pure Li-Fi enables every single LED light to actually provide the Wi-Fi connections? Where do you fit then? And it's like a staring competition. Yeah. The evolution of production I find interesting too. I find it amazing how we talk about 3D printing, about pieces of useless plastic, but I've spent ages with Mark Parker at Nike creating a strategy for Flyknit sneakers, which means that in 3 years' time, the only people that make Nike sneakers are the people who wear them. 3D printed sneakers. This is a 3D printed piece of pasta that I made at Mountain View at Google's office. It's tasty. It takes 6.5 minutes to print out using a machine called Foodini. I sent that picture to my daughter. I said, it's a flower, it reminds me of you. She replied back, #loser. Not quite sure what that means. I think it's a sign of affection. This one on the far right is 4D printing, organic architecture, shoes that fix themselves, chairs that become more comfortable, if that's possible here, to suit your back. Nothing I have said is futuristic. I'm a nowist, not a futurist. I've always thought that futurists should just buy lottery tickets. The reality is that all of this is changing the very, very concept of production, logistics, and delivery. Servers you can make on demand, not buy. I did a lot of stuff with L'Oreal around how to stop using animals for testing. And so we worked with a lot of companies to find out how to print skin. The evolution of reality is such that now, in Japan, the third most highest grossing hotel resort is actually part of the game called Love Plus. Love Plus, you can choose one of 3 girlfriends, and you can modify them to various different personality requirements you may have. And you can go to Love Plus, the hotel, and you can bring your virtual girlfriend that you can only see through a smartphone. This is a guy taking a picture of his friend, and then through it, you can actually see her. This has reduced the birth rate in Asia by 2.6% in the last 4 years. 17% of men aged 16 to 24 would prefer to have a virtual girlfriend than a real girlfriend. And I've heard, although I can't substantiate, that 94% of women feel the same in reverse. I may be divorced, but I'm not bitter. This is the evolution of reality. Who are we going to hire? What is real? You can buy tickets to go and see These guys in concert. On the left is Snoop Dogg. He's alive. On the right is Tupac Shakur. He died 20 years ago. They're both on stage in a concert. And no, this isn't the whole dance move. It's a rotating GIF. This here is a real concert. Now, if you apply this to haptic holographics, the reality is that these concerts where even rappers can get arrested, their hologram can get arrested now. If you apply it to haptic holographics, holograms you can actually touch. Holograms you can touch. The evolution of senses means that the next concert these guys do, you can actually shake their hands afterwards. Who is our workforce in that environment? Who are the human beings that we're providing security for? Are we providing security or encryption or services for people who are physically alive? What about the fact that there's 80 times as many farmers in the world virtually than there are physically? In the United States, there's 200 million online accounts of virtual communities. Some people have multiple accounts. You can buy a gift card from a store with real money. You go in to the online environment, you translate it into virtual currency, you buy some land, you buy a cow, this is all virtual, you grow the cow, you kill the cow, you make it into burgers, and you sell the burgers. For virtual currency, you then transfer back into to real money. What world are we living in? What is real then? How many of you guys are creating services for a virtual world? I think that's maybe a concern. One person. Good. Namaste. Good. The evolution of intelligence is such that we are absolutely, mortally fascinated with the ending of the human era. Yippee, a computer fooled us and thought it was human. There's only 2 days of AI, pure, real AI. There's only 2 days. I advised a film called Ex Machina. Anyone seen Ex Machina? The only thing that they didn't take on board from what my advice was that I wanted the last scene to be the end of the world. All you see is she goes into society after killing everyone, and then they ripped out my advice, which was, and then the world ends. There's only 2 days of pure AI. 1, machines become aware of themselves, and then they assess what the weakest link in the whole thing is. 2, they realize it's humans, we're dead. But yet it's so fascinating that we can end the human era. Yes, how far away are our overlords? I love it. Living forever as a robot. Fantastic. Is artificial intelligence outsmarts our emotions? Are computers better than us? We can't sleepwalk into this future, comrades. The evolution of augmentation is such that we're in a society right now where we don't have to necessarily be limited by our own bodies. How does this impact what you're doing now and in the future, do you think? Can you see it? Literally. The evolution of information is such that when Proteus Digital Health got FDA approval in 2013, this is so old school, for digital smart medicine, I went around to all the big pharmaceutical companies, and I said, do you realize what's just happened, guys? What's just happened is, you know, quantified self with your Nike Fuel Band or your Jawbone or your Fitbit. Forget that. We're talking about taking a pill and your body tells you what's wrong with you. You don't need a doctor. Your body's the doctor. But check this out. What about when humans buy Proteus Digital Health pills or get them prescribed, ironically, from the doctors? Which is the last time they'll ever see the same doctor, right? Get it? They actually, remember the banks and blockchains? So this, you're walking through a shop, a store, and your body tells you what products to buy. What happens to marketing? What happens to advertising? What happens to the medical healthcare profession? And when, on the left-hand side of this, what you ingest can fix you, what happens to medicine? Not one syllable I have uttered is futuristic. Everything is available today. And it is not the fault of the innovation that we haven't included this in our thinking. I'm just scratching the surface. I've only got 45 minutes today. But I run something called the Unlock Sessions for groups of 12 people all around the world. I'm doing one in Bali next week, just one in Miami. And I take people around a journey of this for 3 days and map out strategies. The reality is, in our knowledge and understanding, which is where we are, of number 2 of 5, in knowledge and understanding, there's the driving trends that I kind of covered a bit of. But then there's so much more stuff to look at. There's the market forces. And then you've got the macroeconomic forces. And all of these things actually build up what knowledge and understanding really should look like, in my opinion. And with this, what we need to do is we need to map out what's feasible and less feasible and actually build towards the top right-hand side. But that's for another day. There's 3 key insights. 3 key insights I want to put just for this section, knowledge and understanding. The first is we must close the gap between what people have and what people need. Oh, but we're a B2B company, John. Doesn't matter. You're dealing with people. I'm sorry. You don't become not human when you walk through the door. Although, I must admit, some of the charts I've just shown you, that may be the case. This is the type of thing that I look at those pieces of information, those trends, and think, we need to kind of be doing some of this closing the gap bit. And secondly, we need to create a syntax of belief. We are going to live through a philosophical revolution that's already begun, we just haven't spotted it yet. A philosophical revolution where where whether we win or lose is based on whether people believe or don't believe, which is why I readily take an invitation to speak an Open-Xchange, because the reality is, this is building a backbone that people can believe in the security of their information. It is extremely important. And thirdly, I think we need to innovate radically right now. Why? Because it turns out 86% of innovation is low risk and generates 30% of profits. 14% of innovation is radical and produces 70%. Who here wants to do the first one? Who here wants to do the second one? Awesome. So now we're going to talk about bravery. Sorry, do you want that slide back? Sorry, I see some cameras coming out. Hold on, that's not my best side. All right. Good. Bravery and confidence. When Hon Lick produced the electronic cigarette patents in 2001 to 2003, he told all of the tobacco companies, Imperial, British American Tobacco, Philip Morris, he said, hey, have you got any problem with me filing these patents? And they said, no, because we create real cigarettes and you're creating a piece of machinery, so you go ahead. Which is why Imperial Tobacco were forced to buy the rights to exploit the patents for 175 million quid. Why could we not have the bravery and confidence to work out what is our e-cigarette and do it? What is your e-cigarette? What are you fundamentally disregarding as irrelevant today? Everything I've shown, what do you think isn't relevant? Because that's the threat. The reality is we have a paradox. We have a paradox between exploitation and exploration. We've got an oil tanker, but we need more speedboats. But we can't have a speedboat that's run over by an oil tanker. We need to innovate dead fast and also exploit the existing business at the same time. We need to think fast and slow. We need to move quick, and we need to build solid, robust partnerships at the same time. It's a paradox. It requires an extreme level of bravery and confidence. You have to admit your own failings, and you have to double down in investing in the opposite of those failings. And why now? The reality is, it's a shame he's just walking out on this slide, because this slide is the killer. This is like my best slide. Actually, we're going to wait for his call to finish, and then he'll come back in. No, we won't. So, we have a question. Whereabouts on this chart do you think you are? We have linear prediction for our future in the face of absolutely empirical, ontological, exponential change. And most companies I speak to think they're the yellow line, actually are here. And the key point is the delta between the white line and the yellow line at that particular bit. Because what happens is a fundamental change in something, then there's a perceived low threat rating by everyone, then there's an inflection point into the mainstream, and it's too late. You do not want to be working for Nissan or Toyota or Audi, who've produced their first electric car in the face of Tesla and Blade, which is the first 3D printed car, which, by the way, is faster than a Formula One car. It costs $1,500. You do not want to be in a traditional automotive company. But you know what? They all think that there's not a threat. Banks don't think blockchain's a threat. Education systems don't think Coursera or the Khan Academy is a threat. The games are actually already over. The irony is it's already inflected into the mainstream. It's just that the press don't even see it as a threat to write about it. But the question really is, in terms of the speed and momentum, is what is our ROI in all of this? Well, I want to replace in your brains, just for one day, well, hopefully more, that ROI doesn't mean return on investment. I think the highest risk is a risk of inaction. You have to look at ROI in both ways. The next time your boss or your chairman or your board of directors say, yeah, well, what's the ROI? So well, actually, we see ROI in two ways. This is what the value is that we could produce for the shareholders, and this is the risk of not doing anything. Distinction. I assure you, the risk of inaction is far greater than not necessarily hitting some kind of money target. And we have to build a windmill in a test, learn, improve cycle. Small bets. Lighting small fires, not one big bonfire. Because then, and only then, can we actually turn that delta into an opportunity rather than a risk. Final point. It is all ultimately about people and culture. I only have 2 slides left. But they're really, 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 really important. I would suggest you look at every single person that you work with and do business with or employ or in a relationship with in any way and look at where people are on in those 4 spaces. The reality is, if you have people with skill and no will, it's a waste. If you have people with no skill and no will, why are you working with them? If you have people with will and skill, it's fantastic. And if you have people with no skill but the will, they can learn. You don't need to have all the skill. You do need to have the will. You might think to yourself, we don't know what kind of partners we should have, our B2B partners, or who we should add to our ecosystem in whatever field you may be in. I would use this chart. Map out the people that you work with, the business partners, and work out who has the will. Avoid the people who don't have the will. You should invest all of your energy on the left-hand side of this chart, and none of your energy on the right-hand side of this chart. These people can learn, these people can lead. That's it. Learn, lead, ignore. That's my entire point on people and culture. With the will to succeed, succeed you will. If only I knew this 25 years ago. I've had 7 startups, 3 of which were successful, 4 of which were astronomical failures. Yes, cash is still king. Red numbers are bad. Black numbers are better. The reality is, the reason the failures happened is that I wasn't actually invested myself, nor working with people who invested themselves. We did not have the combined will. That is what closes your company, and that is what makes you a multi-billion-dollar company. It is your willingness. It is not your fortune. It is not how rich you are. It's not how fast you are. It's not how innovative you are. It doesn't matter what country you're in. It doesn't matter what industry vertical you're in. And it's totally irrelevant. The will. Have you got the will? Have you got the will to succeed? Because, my friends, when the winds of change are blowing, some build a wall and others build a windmill.
Thank you.